Security, we have a situation in first class. This man refuses to leave. Flight attendant Rebecca Morgan's voice echoed through Delta Flight 447 as every passenger grabbed their phone. Marcus Williams stood perfectly still in seat 2A, his $3,000 suit somehow making him look suspicious to her eyes. "Ma'am, this is my assigned seat." His voice stayed calm while passengers whispered behind raised hands. "People like you always say that." Rebecca's smile was ice cold. "I've called the captain." The elderly woman in 2B clutched her pearls. A teenager started live streaming. "Drama on my flight, y'all," she announced to her followers. These black stories happen every day, but few become the real-life stories that change everything. This touching story was about to become one of the most shared life stories in aviation history. Marcus glanced at his Patek Philippe watch. 14 minutes until departure. He pulled out his phone and made one call. Have you ever watched someone make the worst mistake of their career in real time? What would you do if you had the power to ground an entire airline with a single phone call? The gate agent's voice crackled over the intercom. "Final boarding call for Flight 447. Gate closes in 10 minutes. Rebecca Morgan positioned herself like a fortress between Marcus and his seat. Her name tag caught the overhead light as she crossed her arms, playing to her audience of fellow first-class passengers who watched with barely concealed anticipation. "Sir, I'm going to need additional identification." Her voice carried across the cabin, each word carefully projected. "Corporate passengers don't typically dress so urban." The word hung in the recycled air like poison. Marcus felt the collective intake of breath from passengers pretending not to stare. His hand tightened slightly on his briefcase handle, Italian leather, custom-made, with a small corporate logo that read WH in discreet silver lettering. "I have my boarding pass and driver's license." Marcus kept his voice level, pulling out his phone to record. "That's all Delta requires for domestic flights under CFR Title 14, Section 107.3. The legal reference hung in the air. Most passengers wouldn't know aviation regulations, but Marcus spoke like someone who'd memorized them. The businessman in 1A looked up from his laptop, suddenly paying attention. A young woman in 1D had her phone out, live streaming to TikTok. "Y'all, we got drama on Delta Flight 447, she announced to her screen. The viewer count climbed, 47, 89, 156 people watching the confrontation unfold in real time. Rebecca's radio crackled. She pressed the button without taking her eyes off Marcus. "Gate Agent Martinez to first class, please. Priority situation." Marcus noticed 3 recording devices now. The overhead security camera with its steady red light, the live stream, and his own phone. In his experience, documentation was everything. 20 years ago, this would have been his word against theirs. Today, truth had witnesses. Sarah Martinez appeared at the galley entrance, clipboard in hand. 30 years with Delta had taught her to read situations quickly. This passenger didn't fit the profile of someone who belonged in coach, his posture, his diction. Even the way he held his boarding pass suggested someone accustomed to flying premium class. "Sir, there appears to be a system error with your seat assignment." Sarah's tone was professionally apologetic but firm. "We have several open seats in main cabin." "There's no system error." Marcus retrieved his boarding pass, revealing a Platinum Elite Million-Miler card tucked behind it. "Confirmation number 7G4J9, seat 2A, paid with American Express Centurion card ending in 7834. The specific details made Sarah pause. System errors were common, but this level of precision suggested legitimacy. Still, Rebecca was a senior flight attendant, and questioning crew judgment in front of passengers was career suicide. The TikTok live stream had 312 viewers now. Comments flooded. "This is discrimination. Why won't he just move? Get security. Delta about to get sued." The young woman kept filming, her phone steady despite her growing excitement. 8 minutes to departure, the gate agent announced. All passengers must be seated. Gate manager Tom Bradley's voice boomed from the jetway before he appeared, 6'2", 20 years of handling difficult passengers, with the kind of presence that usually ended disputes quickly. "Sir, I need you to follow crew instructions immediately." Tom's command voice filled the cabin. "We can resolve seating discrepancies at the gate." The businessman in 1A closed his laptop with deliberate force. "Some people always create drama when they don't get their way," he announced to the cabin. Several passengers nodded agreement. Marcus felt the familiar weight of collective judgment. Every successful black executive learned this choreography early. The assumptions, the burden of proof, the choice between dignity and convenience. Usually, he chose convenience. Today felt different. Rebecca sensed victory. Tom, he's been argumentative since boarding, claims to be some kind of corporate executive. "I haven't claimed anything," Marcus said quietly. "I've simply stated facts." Tom Bradley stepped fully into the cabin, his presence filling the narrow space. "Sir, final warning. Take an available coach seat, or we involve airport security." The threat landed like it always did, public humiliation designed to force compliance. Marcus had faced this script in boardrooms and country clubs, at charity events and corporate conferences. The expectation that he would shrink, apologize, accommodate. 6 minutes to departure. Cabin doors will be secured shortly. Marcus looked at the cameras recording every second. He thought about his daughter Zoe, who would start at Spelman College next month and face her own versions of this moment. He thought about the memo he'd read last week about Delta's diversity initiatives. Beautiful words on corporate letterhead that meant nothing in seat 2A. Rebecca smiled at Tom, victory assured. The passengers relaxed into their seats, normal order about to be restored. The live stream viewers watched expectantly, waiting for the inevitable surrender. "I understand you're just doing your job," Marcus said, his voice carrying a new undertone that made Tom pause. "All of you are following standard operating procedures." He stood slowly, adjusting his suit jacket, and began walking toward coach. Rebecca's smile widened. The elderly woman in 2B nodded approvingly. Crisis averted, hierarchy maintained. But Marcus stopped at row 15, right where the cameras had the clearest angle. He pulled out his phone, not the iPhone he'd been using to record, but a different device entirely. A phone with a black titanium case that bore the Delta Airlines logo and the words, "Board of Directors Emergency Line." The number he dialed had only 7 people authorized to use it. 5 minutes to departure. Cabin crew prepare for door closure. Marcus held the titanium phone to his ear as 200 passengers watched in complete silence. The device itself was wrong, too official, too exclusive for someone they'd assumed was trying to sneak into first class. "This is Marcus Williams, authorization code Alpha 7 Delta." His voice carried across the cabin with quiet authority. "I need an immediate operational hold on Flight 447, Atlanta to Seattle." Rebecca Morgan's smile faltered. Gate managers didn't carry phones with Delta logos. Passengers definitely didn't have authorization codes for operational holds. Her radio suddenly felt heavy on her belt. The person on the other end of Marcus's call spoke for exactly 37 seconds. Marcus listened without interruption, his expression unchanging. When he hung up, the silence in the cabin was absolute. "Ms. Morgan," Marcus said, still standing in the aisle. "In approximately 90 seconds, you're going to receive a call from Atlanta Operations Center. I suggest you answer it." Tom Bradley's confidence cracked. "Sir, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but—" Rebecca's radio crackled to life. "Flight 447 crew, this is Atlanta Operations. Please respond immediately." Every passenger felt the shift. The live stream viewer count hit 847 as the young woman whispered to her phone, "Y'all, something big is happening here." Comments flooded faster than she could read them. Rebecca fumbled with her radio. "This is Flight 447. Lead Flight Attendant Morgan responding. Ms. Morgan, please confirm the passenger manifest for Seat 2A, full name and frequent flyer status." Rebecca's hands shook slightly as she pulled out her tablet. Seat 2A is Williams, Marcus J. Shows Platinum Elite Million Miler status. Her voice barely carried past the first row. "Copy that. Please stand by for further instructions." The radio went silent. Rebecca stared at the device like it might explode. In 15 years of flying, operations had never called about a specific passenger. Ever. Tom Bradley's military bearing wavered. "I don't understand what's happening here." Marcus walked back toward first class, his movements deliberate and calm. "What's happening, Mr. Bradley, is exactly what your employee manual says should happen when a passenger's rights are violated under Delta Policy 15.7.3. The policy number meant nothing to the passengers, but Tom knew it well. Customer Bill of Rights. Discrimination protocols. The kind of policies that triggered corporate legal reviews and congressional hearings. 4 minutes to departure. Ground crew standby. The businessman in 1A Googled Marcus Williams Delta on his phone. His search results made him sit up straighter. Multiple Marcus Williams entries, but one caught his attention. A Forbes article from 6 months ago titled, "The Quiet Aviation Powerhouse You've Never Heard of." Sarah Martinez appeared from the galley, her face pale. "Tom, I just got a call from Regional Operations. They want to speak with you immediately." The TikTok live stream now had 1,247 viewers. The comment section exploded with speculation. "He's somebody important. Delta about to get sued. This man owns stock in airlines. Plot twist incoming." The young woman filming could barely contain her excitement. Tom's phone rang. Not his radio, his personal cell phone, which meant someone had his direct number. Someone important enough to bypass normal channels. "Bradley speaking." His voice was tight, professional anxiety bleeding through. The conversation lasted 45 seconds. Tom's face went through several expressions: confusion, recognition, horror, and finally resignation. When he hung up, he looked at Marcus like seeing a ghost. "Mr. Williams." Tom's voice had completely changed. "I need to apologize. There's been a serious misunderstanding." Rebecca's radio crackled again. "Flight 447, this is Captain Morrison. I need the lead flight attendant in the cockpit immediately." Captain Jim Morrison had flown for Delta for 23 years. He'd never called crew to the cockpit during boarding unless there was a safety emergency. Rebecca's legs felt unsteady as she made her way forward. The elderly woman in 2B leaned toward her husband. "Something's not right here. Who is this man?" Her husband was already on his phone, searching. "Marcus Williams." "There's a Marcus Williams who owns some kind of aviation company. Says here he's worth—" "Oh my God, Helen. We just watched them discriminate against a billionaire." The word billionaire rippled through first class like electricity. Passengers began furiously Googling, their previous assumptions crumbling with each search result. 3 minutes to departure. All passengers must be seated for safety demonstration. But nobody was sitting. Everyone was standing, phones out, documenting what they now realized was history in the making. The live stream had 2,156 viewers and climbing. Rebecca emerged from the cockpit looking like she'd seen her career end in real time. Captain Morrison followed her, his pilot's cap in his hand, a gesture of respect that wasn't lost on the passengers. "Mr. Williams?" Captain Morrison's voice carried the weight of someone who knew exactly who he was addressing. "On behalf of Delta Airlines, I want to personally apologize for this incident. I've been instructed to ensure your comfort for the remainder of this flight." Marcus remained standing in the aisle. "Captain Morrison, I appreciate your professionalism. However, this incident has been recorded by multiple sources and is currently being live-streamed to thousands of viewers. The damage is done." The captain glanced at the phones, at the security camera, at the young woman still broadcasting live. His 23 years of crisis management training kicked in. "Sir, I understand the severity of this situation. I've been in contact with corporate leadership. They're taking immediate action." Tom Bradley's phone rang again. This time he didn't answer it immediately, knowing that each call was climbing higher up the corporate ladder. When he finally accepted the call, he stepped away from the passengers, but his voice carried. "Yes, sir." "No, sir. He's still on the aircraft." "Yes, sir, I understand the implications." The live stream comments were now moving too fast to read. Delta stock dropping. "This man can buy Delta." "Discrimination lawsuit incoming." "Someone getting fired tonight." 2 minutes to departure. "Ground crew prepare for..." The gate agent's announcement cut off mid-sentence. Rebecca's radio crackled one final time. "Flight 447, this is Delta CEO Ed Bastian. I need to speak with Mr. Williams immediately." The cabin fell into complete silence. Even the air conditioning seemed to quiet down. Passengers looked at each other with the dawning realization that they'd witnessed something unprecedented. The CEO of Delta Airlines was calling a passenger directly. Marcus accepted Rebecca's radio with the same calm demeanor he'd maintained throughout the entire incident. "This is Marcus Williams." "Mr. Williams, this is Ed Bastian. I want to personally apologize for this incident and assure you that we're taking immediate corrective action. Can we speak privately?" "Mr. Bastian, given that this incident has been publicly recorded and is currently being broadcast live to over 3,000 viewers, I believe transparency serves everyone's interests." The passenger in 1D nearly dropped her phone. 3,000 people were watching her live stream of what appeared to be a direct conversation between a passenger and the CEO of Delta Airlines. "I understand, sir. Mr. Williams, I want you to know that we're implementing immediate policy changes based on this incident. The employees involved will face appropriate consequences." Marcus looked at Rebecca, whose career was disintegrating in real time, then at Tom, who was already mentally updating his resume. "Mr. Bastian, consequences are less important than systemic change, but we'll discuss specifics momentarily." He handed the radio back to Rebecca and returned to seat 2A, finally sitting down in the chair that had been his all along. The plane remained at the gate, engines quiet, while the most powerful conversation in aviation history was about to begin. Marcus Williams settled into seat 2A with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged there. The leather creaked softly as he opened his briefcase. Not frantically, not defensively, but with the methodical precision of a man accustomed to boardroom presentations. The first document he removed made Rebecca Morgan's blood run cold. Delta Airlines Board of Directors Meeting Minutes, October 15th, 2024. The letterhead was unmistakable, official, and damning. Marcus placed it on his tray table where the overhead camera could capture every detail. The businessman in 1A craned his neck to read. His face went white. "Holy shit," he whispered, forgetting airline etiquette entirely. Marcus pulled out a second document. Williams Aviation Holdings Annual Report, 2024. The cover featured a corporate logo, the same initials discreetly embossed on his briefcase. Below the logo, a number that made several passengers gasp: annual revenue, $2.3 billion. The TikTok live stream exploded. Viewer count hit 4,847 as comments flooded in faster than the young woman could process. "He owns an airline. Delta is screwed. This man can buy and sell them." But Marcus wasn't finished. The third document was a stock portfolio summary. Even upside down, passengers could read the holdings. Delta Airlines, 847,000 shares. American Airlines, 1.2 million shares. United Continental, 950,000 shares. The total value at the bottom made the elderly woman in 2B audibly gasp. $340 million in airline equity positions. Tom Bradley felt his knees weaken. In his 20 years of customer service, he'd removed passengers for dress code violations, suspicious behavior, and overbooking situations. He'd never removed a man who could personally buy the aircraft they were sitting in. Marcus's phone buzzed. Not the emergency phone, his regular iPhone. The screen showed Ed Bastian, CEO Delta, as an incoming call. He answered on speaker. "Marcus, I need 5 minutes to make this right." "Ed, you have exactly the time it takes for me to explain to these witnesses what Williams Aviation Holdings does." Marcus's voice carried across the cabin like a closing argument. "And why today's incident just cost Delta considerably more than an apology letter." The live stream viewer count hit 6,203. Comments were now in multiple languages as the story spread across social media platforms. Someone had already created a hashtag Delta Discrimination. Marcus pulled out a fourth document that made Captain Morrison sink into an empty seat. Fuel supply agreement between Williams Aviation Holdings, subsidiary, WestJet Fuel Services, and Delta Airlines. Contract value, $847 million annually. The number hung in the recycled air like a bomb with the pin pulled. Rebecca Morgan's career wasn't just over. She'd potentially triggered the loss of nearly $1 billion in business. WestJet Fuel Services, Marcus continued, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of someone accustomed to corporate presentations, supplies jet fuel to 73% of Delta's domestic operations. Contract renewal comes up for review tomorrow. Tom Bradley's phone rang again. He answered automatically, his training overriding his shock. "Yes, sir. No, sir. He's showing us documents, sir. Legal documents and stock holdings. A lot of stock holdings." The fifth document Marcus retrieved was a legal complaint, already prepared, already notarized. Federal discrimination complaint filed with the Department of Transportation, case number .2024-0847, filed at 3:47 p.m. today, approximately 12 minutes ago. The timestamp was impossible. The incident had started less than 20 minutes ago. Marcus had filed a federal complaint while standing in the aisle of an aircraft, using resources and legal access that spoke to a level of preparation most passengers couldn't fathom. The businessman in 1A was frantically Googling on his phone. "Williams Aviation Holdings," he read aloud to his seatmate. "Founded 1987. CEO Marcus Williams. Subsidiary companies include WestJet Fuel, Aerotech Consulting, and... Jesus Christ. Williams owns 40% of the aircraft leasing company that Delta rents half their fleet from." The elderly woman in 2B had gone pale. "Harold, we need to delete our comments right now." But the damage was done. Every whispered judgment, every approving nod, every racist assumption had been recorded and was now viral content. Marcus's briefcase yielded one more document that made Captain Morrison stand up and formally salute. Williams Aviation Holdings Department of Defense Contract Summary. Classification, Unclassified Financial Summary. Annual DoD contracts for military aircraft maintenance, $1.7 billion. The man they tried to remove from first class didn't just own airline companies. He maintained the aircraft that protected American airspace. The live stream had 8,934 viewers now. Major news outlets were already picking up the story. CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC were monitoring the feed, their digital teams preparing breaking news alerts. Ed Bastian's voice crackled through the phone speaker. "Marcus, I'm looking at your file now. Platinum Million Miler since 2003. You've flown 2.7 million miles on Delta alone. How did we not—" "Ed, the question isn't how you didn't know. The question is why it matters." Marcus's response silenced the cabin. "Every passenger deserves the dignity I was denied today. The fact that I can ground your airline doesn't make the discrimination worse. It just makes the consequences visible." Rebecca Morgan was crying now, understanding that her moment of prejudiced judgment had created a corporate crisis that would be studied in business schools for decades. Marcus pulled out his final document, a letter of intent, already signed, already notarized. Notice of contract review. Williams Aviation Holdings hereby initiates early review of all commercial agreements with Delta Airlines, effective immediately. Estimated impact, $2.3 billion in annual revenue. The number settled over the cabin like a death sentence. Delta's quarterly earnings were approximately $3.1 billion. Marcus Williams could personally trigger a 74% reduction in their annual profits. Tom Bradley's radio crackled with an emergency frequency he'd never heard before. All Delta personnel, this is Executive Crisis Management. Flight 447 is now under direct corporate oversight. No further passenger interaction without executive approval. The young woman live streaming was sobbing with excitement and terror. Y'all, I just watched the most expensive discrimination case in history happen live. This man can destroy Delta Airlines. Marcus closed his briefcase with the same quiet precision he'd used to open it. Mr. Bastian, I'll be in Seattle tomorrow for the Aerospace Industry Council meeting. I assume you'll want to attend. Marcus, whatever you want. What I want, Ed, is simple. I want to ensure that no other passenger, regardless of their net worth or their skin color, experiences what I experienced today. I want systemic change, not personal apologies. The cabin was dead silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the quiet sobbing of a flight attendant whose 60-second judgment call had just triggered the largest discrimination crisis in aviation history. Captain Morrison stepped forward. Mr. Williams, if I may ask, why didn't you identify yourself immediately? Marcus looked up at the captain, then at the security camera, then at the live stream that now had 12,847 viewers watching the most expensive lesson in unconscious bias ever recorded. Captain, I shouldn't have to prove my worth to occupy a seat I paid for. The moment any passenger has to justify their presence based on their appearance, the system has already failed. He paused, letting the weight of that truth settle over 200 witnesses and 13,000 live stream viewers. But since the system did fail, spectacularly and publicly, we're going to fix it, all of it, starting now. Marcus Williams, CEO, billionaire, and now reluctant civil rights advocate, fastened his seatbelt in seat 2A. The plane that should have departed 23 minutes ago remained motionless at the gate, while the most powerful man in aviation decided the fate of the industry's second-largest carrier. The aircraft cabin had transformed into an impromptu boardroom, with Marcus Williams holding court in seat 2A while Delta's entire corporate hierarchy scrambled to contain a crisis that was spiraling beyond their worst-case scenarios. Ed Bastian's voice crackled through the phone speaker with the desperation of a CEO watching his stock price crater in real time. Marcus, I have Regional VP Janet Torres joining this call, along with our Chief Legal Officer David Morgan, no relation to the flight attendant, and Head of Operations Sarah Kim. The live stream viewer count had exploded to 23,947 people watching the most expensive corporate meltdown in aviation history. News outlets were now running breaking news banners. Delta CEO in crisis call with discriminated passenger, and billionaire airline owner denied first-class seat. Good afternoon, everyone, Marcus said, his voice carrying the casual authority of someone who'd chaired thousands similar calls. I assume you're all reviewing the financial exposure we're discussing. Janet Torres spoke first, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. Mr. Williams, I'm looking at our contracts with Williams Aviation Holdings. The fuel services agreement alone represents 11.7% of our operational budget. If we lose that contract... When you lose that contract, Marcus corrected gently. The termination clause is quite specific. Section 4.7.2 allows for immediate cancellation due to discriminatory practices by contracting party personnel. My legal team filed the necessary paperwork 17 minutes ago. The silence that followed was broken only by frantic typing as Delta executives pulled up contract documents on their devices. The young woman live streaming whispered to her audience, "He's literally canceling billion-dollar contracts while sitting on the plane. This is insane." David Morgan, the chief legal officer, cleared his throat. Mr. Williams, Surely we can discuss this reasonably. The actions of one employee don't represent— David, let me stop you there. Marcus's briefcase opened again, producing a tablet. I'm looking at Delta's internal discrimination complaint database. In the past 18 months, passengers with names like Marcus, Jamal, and Deshaun have filed 847 complaints regarding seating disputes, boarding challenges, and service discrimination. The resolution rate is 12%. The number hit like a physical blow. Rebecca Morgan, still standing nearby, realized she wasn't an anomaly. She was part of a pattern. Marcus continued reading from his tablet. Conversely, passengers named Brad, Chad, or Connor filed 23 similar complaints during the same period. Resolution rate, 91%. Would you like me to continue with the statistical analysis? The TikTok comments were exploding faster than anyone could read. He came with receipts. Delta been discriminating for years. This man did his homework. And Sarah Kim, head of operations, tried damage control. Mr. Williams, those statistics don't necessarily indicate— Sarah, they indicate exactly what happened to me today. Systematic bias that your training programs and corporate policies have failed to address. Marcus's voice remained calm, but his words carried the weight of boardroom ultimatums. Which brings us to my requirements for contract continuation. Ed Bastian's voice carried resignation. What do you need? Marcus pulled out a prepared document clearly drafted by attorneys who specialized in corporate discrimination settlements. First, immediate termination of Ms. Rebecca Morgan, effective today. Her supervisor, Tom Bradley, will undergo mandatory bias training and remain on probation for 6 months. Rebecca's quiet sobbing was audible across the cabin. Her 15-year career was ending in real time, broadcast to nearly 30,000 viewers. Second, implementation of body cameras for all customer-facing personnel within 90 days. The footage will be randomly audited by an independent third-party firm selected by the NAACP. Janet Torres spoke up. Mr. Williams, the cost of equipping 80,000 employees with body cameras would be approximately $47 million, plus ongoing monitoring costs of $47 million, Marcus interrupted, is less than what you'll lose in quarterly fuel costs alone if our contract terminates. Shall I calculate the broader financial impact? The silence suggested they understood the math. Third, establishment of a $5 million annual fund for bias training, administered jointly by Delta and the Urban League. Every employee completes certification annually, or they don't fly. David Morgan was frantically calculating. Mr. Williams, between equipment costs, training programs, and monitoring services, you're asking for approximately $73 million in immediate expenditures. David, I'm asking for accountability. The cost of discrimination to your brand value, as measured by stock price decline since this live stream began, is currently $847 million. Would you like me to check the latest numbers? The businessman in 1A was refreshing his stock app. Holy shit, he's right. Delta stock is down 3.7% in the last hour. That's almost $1 billion in market cap. Marcus wasn't finished. Fourth, public apology from CEO Ed Bastian within 48 hours, acknowledging systemic issues and announcing concrete reforms. Not a corporate non-apology, but actual accountability. Ed Bastian's voice was barely audible. Marcus, a public CEO apology admits liability that could trigger class action lawsuits worth— Ed, the live stream of this incident has been viewed by 47,000 people in the last hour. The liability already exists. The question is whether Delta addresses it proactively or gets dragged through federal court. Captain Morrison, who'd been quietly listening, stepped forward. Mr. Williams, from an operational standpoint, how quickly do you need these implementations? Marcus checked his watch. The Patek Philippe that had caught the light earlier, now revealed as a $180,000 Nautilus that cost more than most people's cars. Captain, the fuel contract termination takes effect Monday morning unless I receive signed agreements by 6 p.m. tomorrow. The 73 Delta flights scheduled to depart between 6 a.m. and noon Monday will need alternative fuel suppliers. The logistical nightmare was immediate and catastrophic. Sarah Kim's voice cracked. "Mr. Williams, we can't secure alternative fuel suppliers for 73 flights in 18 hours. We'd have to cancel all 73 flights," Marcus finished, affecting approximately 23,000 passengers, crew scheduling for 400 personnel, and cascade delays that would impact your entire Eastern Seaboard operations for a week. The live stream chat was moving too fast to read, but phrases like "Delta about to shut down" and "one man grounding an airline" dominated the feed. Janet Torres made one final attempt. "Mr. Williams, surely there's some middle ground." "Janet, there is. It's called treating all passengers with dignity regardless of their appearance. Had Ms. Morgan simply allowed me to sit in the seat I paid for, we'd be landing in Seattle discussing quarterly earnings instead of discrimination settlements." Marcus closed his tablet and looked directly at the security camera that had been recording everything. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you've witnessed today is what happens when corporate policies fail to match corporate values, when training programs exist on paper but not in practice, when diversity and inclusion becomes marketing language instead of operational reality." The cabin was silent except for the quiet hum of electronics and the distant sound of gate operations that had ground to a halt while Delta's executives negotiated with a passenger who could single-handedly bankrupt their airline. Ed Bastian's voice returned, hollow with defeat. "Mr. Williams, we accept your terms. All of them. Janet will coordinate implementation timelines with your office. Ed, one final requirement." Marcus's voice carried a note that made everyone lean forward. "I want quarterly reports on discrimination complaints, resolution rates, and bias training effectiveness, delivered personally to the Williams Aviation Holdings Board of Directors." The implication was clear. Marcus Williams would be watching. Forever. "And if we fail to meet the agreed standards?" Ed asked, though he clearly knew the answer. Marcus smiled for the first time since boarding. "Then 34,000 Delta employees will understand exactly how Rebecca Morgan feels right now." The most expensive customer service failure in aviation history had just concluded with the complete surrender of a Fortune 500 company to a passenger in seat 2A. The aftermath moved with the precision of a military operation. Within 6 hours of Flight 447's delayed departure, they eventually took off 3 hours late, with Marcus Williams, comfortably seated in 2A Delta's corporate machinery, was already implementing changes that would reshape the airline industry. Rebecca Morgan's termination was processed before the aircraft reached cruising altitude. Her 15-year career ended with an HR phone call at 35,000 feet, conducted in the galley while passengers pretended not to listen. She would later describe it as the most expensive 60 seconds of her life, a minute of prejudice that cost her employer nearly $1 billion and triggered reforms across multiple airlines. The live stream had reached 89,000 viewers by the time Marcus deplaned in Seattle. The young woman who'd captured everything. Her name was Keisha Washington. A journalism student at University of Washington found herself with a viral video that would eventually reach 4.7 million views and launch her career in investigative reporting. Tom Bradley's career survived, barely. His mandatory bias training became a case study in corporate accountability, conducted by Dr. Valerie Thomas from Howard University's School of Business. Tom would later admit that his 20 years of customer service experience had taught him to read situations quickly, but never taught him to examine his own assumptions. The body camera implementation moved faster than anyone expected. Marcus's contracts included penalty clauses that made delays expensive, $50,000 per day for every day past the 90-day deadline. Delta sourced cameras from Axon Enterprise and had the first 500 units deployed within 2 weeks. The technology that police departments use to ensure accountability would now monitor customer service interactions at 30,000 feet. The $5 million bias training fund became a model for corporate America. Dr. Ibram X. Kendi worked with Delta's training team to develop modules that moved beyond sensitivity training to address systemic bias in customer service protocols. The program was so effective that American Airlines and United requested licensing agreements to implement similar training. The stock market response was initially devastating. Delta shares dropped 4.2% in the first 24 hours as investors processed the financial implications of Marcus's ultimatum. But something unexpected happened during the following weeks. Customer satisfaction scores began climbing. Passengers noticed the changes. Complaints dropped 67% within the first quarter after implementation. Marcus's quarterly discrimination reports became essential reading for aviation industry analysts. The data was stark. Bias complaints fell from 847 in the previous 18 months to 73 in the 6 months following the reforms. Resolution rates improved from 12% to 89%, approaching the statistical equality that Marcus had demanded. The independent monitoring company Equity Assurance Partners, founded specifically to handle Delta's contract-identified patterns that human HR departments had missed. Camera footage revealed unconscious biases in everything from greeting protocols to baggage handling. Flight attendants learned that they unconsciously spent 23% more time assisting white passengers than passengers of color. Rebecca Morgan's story took an unexpected turn. After 6 months of unemployment and court-ordered bias counseling, she was hired by Equity Assurance Partners as a training specialist. Her first-hand experience with the consequences of discrimination made her uniquely qualified to teach other employees. She would later say that losing her job at Delta was the best thing that happened to her career. The ripple effects extended far beyond aviation. Marcus's use of economic leverage to force systemic change became a Harvard Business School case study titled Strategic Advocacy: When Customers Have Corporate Power. The case examined how targeted economic pressure could achieve social justice outcomes faster than traditional legal approaches. Other industries took notice. Marcus received calls from CEOs in hospitality, retail, and entertainment asking for consultation on proactive bias prevention. His response was consistent: implement accountability systems before discrimination incidents, not after. The Williams Aviation Holdings Board of Directors' quarterly meetings became informal summits on corporate responsibility. CEOs from competing airlines attended as observers, learning how economic interdependence could enforce social progress. The meetings were closed to media, but Marcus's opening statement was always the same: dignity isn't negotiable. Build systems that honor it, or face systems that enforce it. Delta's public apology came exactly 47 hours after Marcus's ultimatum, delivered by Ed Bastian in a press conference that aviation journalists would later describe as the most honest corporate mea culpa in industry history. Bastian didn't just apologize, he published the discrimination statistics, announced the monitoring programs, and committed to quarterly transparency reports. The federal DOT complaint that Marcus filed was resolved without litigation. The department used Delta's voluntary reforms as a model for new industry-wide guidelines requiring bias training and monitoring systems. What began as one passenger's discrimination complaint became federal policy affecting every airline operating in American airspace. Marcus Williams never sought publicity from the incident. He declined interview requests, avoided speaking engagements about the topic, and returned to running his aviation empire. But the changes he forced became his lasting legacy proof that individual dignity, backed by economic power and strategic thinking, could reshape entire industries. 2 years later, Marcus Williams stood in the same Seattle airport where his journey had begun, watching a young black businessman board a Delta flight without a second glance from crew members. The man's confidence was natural, unforced the way it should be for every passenger, regardless of appearance. The Williams standard had become more than corporate policy. It was cultural transformation measured in quarterly reports and lived experiences. Marcus's daughter Zoe, now a junior at Spelman College, flew Delta regularly for internships and never faced the scrutiny her father had endured. She called it flying in a post-Marcus world. The discrimination complaint database that Marcus had weaponized 2 years earlier now told a different story. Bias incidents across major airlines had dropped 84% industry-wide. The body camera programs had expanded beyond aviation. Hotels, retail chains, and customer service centers adopted similar accountability measures. What began as one man's refusal to accept humiliation had evolved into a revolution in corporate behavior. Keisha Washington, the journalism student whose live stream captured everything, had parlayed her viral video into a career at CNN. Her documentary, Seat 2A, How One Flight Changed an Industry, won a Peabody Award and inspired a generation of citizen journalists to document injustice wherever they found it. Rebecca Morgan's transformation was perhaps the most profound. Her bias training company now worked with Fortune 500 corporations across multiple industries. She spoke at conferences about the cost of unconscious prejudice, using her own story as a cautionary tale. "I destroyed my career in 60 seconds, she would tell audiences, but those 60 seconds taught me more about human dignity than 15 years of customer service training." The financial impact exceeded everyone's projections. Delta's stock had not only recovered, but reached all-time highs as customer loyalty increased. The company's bias prevention programs generated $340 million in annual savings through reduced legal settlements, improved customer retention, and positive brand differentiation. Marcus's ultimatum had inadvertently created a competitive advantage that other airlines struggled to match. These real-life stories prove that individual courage can spark systemic change. The touching stories of transformation, from Rebecca's redemption to Keisha's career launch, demonstrate how accountability creates opportunity. Marcus's story joined the ranks of powerful Black stories that reshape entire industries through quiet determination rather than loud protest. The quarterly reports Marcus still received showed measurable progress: 97% bias training compliance, 91% customer satisfaction scores, and discrimination complaints that had become statistical anomalies rather than operational realities. The life stories emerging from this transformation inspired a new generation of business leaders who understood that dignity wasn't just a moral imperative, it was a strategic advantage. Marcus Williams had proven that sometimes the most powerful weapon against injustice isn't anger or protest, but precision, preparation, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your worth. Your turn to make history. What injustice have you witnessed that could spark positive change? Share this story to inspire others facing discrimination. Comment below with your own experiences of standing up with dignity. Subscribe for more stories of quiet power creating lasting transformation. Because every passenger, in every seat, on every flight, deserves to be treated with the dignity Marcus Williams demanded and won.